She stood under the blinding lights, trembling as the crowd whispered. A poor girl from a distant island in the Philippines, barefoot, nervous, and holding a dream too big for her fragile frame. No one expected much. In a show where talent came dressed in glamour, she was simplicity itself. But life had taught Lara that even broken voices could carry miracles. As the camera zoomed in on her face, her eyes glimmered, not with confidence, but with something deeper, hope. Hope that maybe this moment could rewrite the story of her life. Behind those eyes were the sounds of crashing waves, the smell of the sea, and nights spent singing under a leaking roof to drown out hunger. The host had introduced her name softly, Lara Mendoza, from Cebu. A murmur passed through the judges. A small island, someone muttered. They smiled politely, expecting an ordinary performance. But nothing about Lara's journey had been ordinary. How did a girl who had never seen a real microphone before end up on one of the biggest stages in the world? What dream had carried her across oceans and fear to reach this moment? The lights dimmed. The music waited. For a second, silence held the entire hall captive. It was the same silence Lara had felt 1,000 times in her life, before tears, before hunger, before prayer. But this silence was different. This one was full of possibility. And somewhere in that vast silence, a question echoed through every heart watching. Can a voice born in poverty truly touch the world? Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. And tonight, the world was about to hear one. Lara Mendoza lived in a small wooden house built beside the ocean, where the waves hummed like distant lullabies every night. Her days began before sunrise, helping her mother lay out dried fish on bamboo racks for the market. The salty wind tangled her hair, and her hands often smelled of the sea, but Lara never complained. That was her world, simple, quiet, and filled with small acts of survival. She had never owned fancy clothes or shoes. Most of her dresses were hand-sewn from old fabric scraps her mother collected from neighbors. Yet, whenever she sang while washing clothes or fetching water, the whole village would stop and listen. There was a purity in her voice, something that came from deep pain and deeper faith. Lara wasn't loud or confident. She spoke softly, as if afraid her words might disturb the air around her. But when she sang, everything changed. Her eyes would close, and it felt as though she was lifting her entire heart toward the heavens. Singing was her escape, a fragile bridge between the life she had and the life she dreamed of. At 16, she carried more worry than most adults. She often skipped meals so her mother could eat. When it rained, they placed buckets to catch the water leaking from their roof. Still, Lara smiled. She found joy in tiny moments, a shared laugh with her mother, a sunset that painted the sea gold, the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. Every night before sleeping, she would look at the single photograph pinned above her bed, a faded image of her father, a fisherman who never returned from the sea. She would whisper softly, "One day, Papa, you'll hear me sing from the sky." That dream had become her heartbeat. She didn't dream of fame or riches, just a stage, a song, and a chance to be heard. But behind her calm smile, she carried quiet fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her voice, her only treasure, wasn't enough to change anything? Still, every morning, she sang. Because for Lara Mendoza, music was not a choice, it was her only way to survive. Life in the small fishing village was not kind to dreamers. For Lara Mendoza, every note she sang was a fight against the noise of reality, the unpaid rent, the sickness that often took her mother's strength, the whispers of neighbors who called her dreams foolish. There were days when hunger felt heavier than hope. Lara would wake to the sound of her mother coughing, her thin frame bent over a small charcoal stove. The smell of burnt rice filled the air. It was all they could afford. Watching her mother grow weaker each day tore something inside Lara. She felt helpless, her voice, her only gift, could not feed them. One evening, as the storm winds howled outside, Lara sat by the broken window, clutching a small transistor radio, her only connection to the world beyond their island. That night, she heard an announcement: America's Got Talent is opening auditions online for international participants. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, the walls around her seemed to disappear. She imagined herself on that stage, lights shining, her mother watching proudly. But then reality struck. They didn't even have a proper phone or internet connection. The dream felt unreachable, like the stars reflected on the water, beautiful, but untouchable. She almost laughed at the thought. A poor girl from Cebu, singing in front of Simon Cowell. It sounded like a fantasy meant for someone else's life. Yet the idea refused to leave her mind. Each night she'd close her eyes and hear that stage calling her name. But every morning, doubt returned, whispering louder, "You'll never make it." The real battle wasn't against the world, it was within her heart. She was torn between hope and fear, between staying safe in her small world or stepping into the unknown. And when her mother fell sick one morning, too weak to stand, Lara made a silent promise. She would sing, not for fame, not for money, but to save the only person who had ever believed in her. That was the moment her dream turned into a mission. A dream born from love, fear, and the desperate hope of a daughter who refused to give up. The morning that changed everything began quietly. The sun had barely risen, and the ocean was still asleep. Lara sat beside her mother's bed, holding her frail hand. Aling Rosa's breathing was weak, her eyes half open. "Don't worry about me," she whispered softly. "Just sing, Anik, sing for your dreams." Those words struck deep, like a promise carved into her soul. That same day, a group of local volunteers arrived in the village bringing mobile phones and internet service for students. It was the first time Lara had seen a smartphone up close. Her heart pounded. Maybe, just maybe, this was her sign. That night, while the rain tapped gently against the window, Lara recorded herself singing on the borrowed phone. She sang barefoot, under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, her voice trembling but pure. She chose a song her father once hummed by the sea, a song about hope rising from sorrow. When she finished, she cried quietly, clutching the phone as if it carried her entire heart. The next morning, she uploaded her video to the AGT online audition page with shaking hands. She didn't expect a reply. It was a message to the universe, a final cry from a small girl who had nothing left but her song. Weeks passed. Life went on. Then one afternoon, as she helped her mother at the market, a stranger approached her, an American man with a badge. "Are you Lara Mendoza?" he asked. She froze. "Your video," he said, smiling, went viral. "The judges want you to come to Los Angeles." Lara stood still, her heart racing so fast it hurt. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The villagers gathered around, clapping, some in tears. Her mother covered her mouth, crying silently. That night, Lara looked up at the stars, tears streaming down her cheeks. The same sky that had once made her feel small now felt close, as if it was listening. In that moment, Lara realized something powerful: dreams don't belong to the rich, the beautiful, or the lucky. They belong to those who dare to believe, even when everything tells them not to. The journey to America was both a dream and a test. Lara had never been on a plane before. She carried a small backpack filled with second-hand clothes and a photo of her mother tucked safely inside. As she looked out of the airplane window, the vast clouds made her feel both free and frightened. This was the world her songs had never reached before, a world that was about to listen. But when she arrived in Los Angeles, the glamour was overwhelming. Bright lights, cameras, confident contestants with perfect clothes, Lara felt invisible among them. Her simple dress and quiet nature made her feel out of place. She barely spoke English, and every step toward the audition stage felt heavier than the last. There were moments she almost turned back. She thought of the life she had left behind, the gentle sea, her mother's tired smile, the warmth of home. "What if I fail?" she whispered to herself, clutching the locket her mother had given her. But then, she remembered that her voice was not just hers, it carried every sacrifice her mother had made. The day before her audition, Lara sat alone on a park bench near the venue. She watched other singers practicing confidently, laughing with friends. She felt tears rise, a familiar wave of loneliness washing over her. But in that loneliness, something changed. She realized that fear had always been part of her journey, and maybe, it didn't need to be her enemy anymore. She began humming softly, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. Each note carried a memory, her father's laughter, her mother's cough, the sound of the sea. People walking by began to stop and listen, captivated by the raw emotion in her voice. For the first time, Lara didn't sing to prove herself. She sang to feel alive. That night, as she looked at the mirror in her small hotel room, she saw not the poor girl from the fishing village, but a fighter, shaped by love and loss. Her fear was still there, but now it stood beside her, not against her. And tomorrow, that fearless version of Lara would step onto the AGT stage. The stage lights glowed like a sunrise as Lara stepped forward. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the crowd's murmurs. Thousands of faces stared back, some curious, some doubtful. The judges sat before her, unreadable. For a moment, Lara felt like that same little girl standing barefoot by the shore, small, unseen, and trembling. Then she remembered her mother's words, "Just sing, Anak, sing for your dreams." The music began, soft, almost like a heartbeat. Lara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she sang her first note, the hall fell silent. Her voice floated through the air, gentle yet powerful, soaked in emotion. Each lyric carried a piece of her story, her father's loss, her mother's pain, her hunger, her hope. The crowd didn't just hear her, they felt her. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was real. It carried the sound of the sea, the ache of loneliness, and the strength of a heart that refused to break. Even Simon Cowell, known for his stern expressions, leaned forward, his eyes softening. As the final note echoed, a deep silence filled the room. Then, like a wave, the audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered through the theater. Lara stood frozen, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but reality was far more beautiful, far more overwhelming. Simon slowly stood and pressed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti rained from above, glimmering like stars falling from heaven. Lara covered her mouth, shaking, unable to believe what she was seeing. In that instant, she wasn't just a poor girl from a forgotten island, she was a voice that reached millions. As the light sparkled around her, Lara looked up, imagining her mother watching from across the ocean. She whispered through her tears, "We did it, Mama." The judges smiled. The audience cheered. And in that moment, Lara Mendoza's dream became a story of how courage, born from pain, can shine brighter than gold. That night, the world didn't just meet a singer. It met a soul that had learned to turn sorrow into song. When the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Lara stood alone on the empty stage, the golden confetti still scattered around her feet. For the first time in her life, she felt weightless, not because of fame, but because she had finally freed the voice that had always lived inside her. The next morning, messages from all over the world began to flood in. People called her the girl who sang from her soul. Some said her song reminded them of their mothers, others of their own lost dreams. Lara realized then that her story was never just hers, it belonged to everyone who had ever felt small, forgotten, or afraid to dream. Back home in the Philippines, her mother watched the performance on a neighbor's TV, tears rolling down her tired cheeks. She reached out to touch the screen, whispering her daughter's name with pride. The ocean outside their window seemed to sing back, carrying Lara's voice across the waves. Fame didn't change Lara. When interviews and offers came, she still wore her same simple smile. She spoke softly, always saying, "It's not about winning. It's about being brave enough to try." She used her prize money to build a small music school in her village, so that other children, barefoot and shy like she once was, could find their voices too. Looking back, Lara understood something she never had before. Success wasn't the confetti or the stage, it was the courage to stand in your truth, even when the world doesn't believe in you. Every hardship, every hunger, every tear had shaped her song into something the world could feel. Her story became a quiet reminder that dreams don't need perfect circumstances, just a believing heart. Because even the smallest voices can echo across oceans when they sing with truth. And so, the poor girl who once sang under a leaking roof had taught millions one powerful lesson. That greatness isn't born from comfort, but from the courage to sing when no one is listening. What if the girl everyone ignored was born with a gift the world had been waiting to hear? What if the same dusty streets that witnessed her hunger also held the echo of a voice that could touch millions? In the heart of Davao City, where the air smelled of smoke and sea, a barefoot girl named Althea sang under the dim lights of street lamps. Her songs weren't meant for fame or applause, they were meant for survival. She sang for coins, for bread, for the next day. Yet, there was something divine in her tone, a trembling softness that spoke of hope, pain, and innocence all at once. The world around her was loud and careless. Jeepneys roared, markets buzzed, and people hurried by. But sometimes, when her voice rose above the noise, strangers stopped. For a moment, they forgot their rush. For a moment, they felt. Every night, as she walked home to the small corner she shared with Lola Miriam, Althea carried a single dream, to one day sing on a real stage, before real lights. A dream so fragile it barely survived the weight of reality. Lola Miriam would often hold her hand, whispering, "God listens to dreams whispered in the dark, Anak." And Althea believed. Because believing was all she could afford. Until one rainy evening, when a man with a guitar stopped near her. He didn't walk past. He didn't just listen, he heard. That moment, unnoticed by the world, was where everything began to change. The girl from Davao, who had nothing but her voice, was about to walk a road that would test her soul, break her fears, and prove that dreams, no matter where they're born, are real. In the crowded heart of Davo's public market, Althea lived a life stitched together by survival and small hopes. At 15, she was thinner than her age, her skin kissed by the sun, her hair tied in uneven strands. Yet, her eyes, those deep, brown eyes, carried a quiet fire. They told stories of hunger, yes, but also of dreams she dared not say aloud. Every morning, Althea would wake before dawn to the faint hum of tricycles and the smell of fish being laid out on the stalls. With a tin can in one hand and a voice that could move mountains in the other, she'd start her day, singing for coins along the busy sidewalks of Roxas Avenue. Some days were kind, most were not. When people ignored her, she didn't stop. When rain soaked her cardboard shelter, she didn't cry. Instead, she sang louder, not for attention, but to drown the ache in her chest. Singing was her way of staying alive. Her Lola Miriam, old and frail, waited at their small shack made of tin sheets. She would listen from afar, smiling faintly whenever Althea's voice carried through the wind. To Althea, her grandmother was everything, her audience, her reason, her world. Althea was not bitter about her life, she had learned that sadness only makes hunger heavier. Instead, she found beauty in little things, a piece of bread shared with a stray dog, a stranger's smile, the golden sky at sunset. But beneath her calm strength lived a fear, that life would always remain the same. That she would always be the nameless girl singing on the streets, and her voice would fade with the city noise. Every night, before closing her eyes, she whispered a small prayer to the stars. "Please, just once, let someone truly hear me." And though she didn't know it yet, that prayer had already reached the heart of someone who would soon change her life forever. Life had always tested Althea, but the hardest blows came quietly, not with noise, but with silence. It began one morning when Lola Miriam's cough grew deeper, harsher, echoing through their fragile shack. At first, Althea tried to ignore it, pretending it was nothing. But as days passed, her grandmother's strength began to fade. The woman who once greeted her with warmth now struggled to lift her head. Medicine cost more than songs could earn. Althea sang harder, longer, until her voice cracked under the weight of exhaustion. She stood beneath the scorching sun, her voice trembling, hoping someone, anyone, would notice. But people passed her by, eyes fixed on their phones, their worlds too full to hold space for her pain. Each night, she returned home with coins that clinked like reminders of her failure. She'd kneel beside her grandmother and place the coins gently in a small cup, whispering, "Soon, Lola. I'll earn enough soon." But inside, she knew hope was slipping away. The sound of the waves near the port became her companion. Sometimes, she'd sit there, hugging her knees, watching ships leave, wondering how it felt to go somewhere new, somewhere where people didn't look through her. One evening, when Lola's breathing slowed, Althea felt a terror she had never known before. She sang softly beside her, a lullaby she remembered from her childhood, the same song that once made her grandmother smile. But this time, the silence that followed broke her heart. That night, the girl from Davao lost the only person who ever believed in her. For days, Althea wandered the streets with no destination. Her songs stopped. Her eyes dimmed. The world she once sang to now felt colder, emptier. She questioned everything, her faith, her dreams, even her own worth. In a city that never noticed her living, no one noticed her grieving. But fate has its way of finding those who are nearly broken, because sometimes, when a dream dies, destiny begins to listen. But beneath her calm strength lived a fear, that life would always remain the same. That she would always be the nameless girl singing on the streets, and her voice would fade with the city noise. Every night, before closing her eyes, she whispered a small prayer to the stars. "Please, just once, let someone truly hear me." And though she didn't know it yet, that prayer had already reached the heart of someone who would soon change her life forever. Days turned into weeks, and Althea's voice, once the sound of her soul, had fallen silent. She wandered the streets like a ghost, clutching the small pendant her grandmother had left behind. Hunger became her companion, loneliness, her shadow. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining again, the kind of heavy downpour that made the whole city shiver. Althea stood under a broken streetlight near the Davao market, watching the world blur through raindrops. The streets emptied, yet she stayed. Something inside her whispered, "Sing again." At first, her voice was weak, trembling like the rain. But as she closed her eyes, memories of her grandmother flooded in, her soft laughter, her faith, her words about dreams whispered in the dark. The pain in her heart turned into strength, and her song grew louder, fuller, carried by the storm. That's when a man stopped nearby, Ethan Cruz, a local musician who volunteered at a small community center. He had been playing at a nearby cafe when he heard the faint echo of her voice rising through the rain. It wasn't perfect, it was raw, cracked, real. The kind of voice that told a story before words even began. Ethan stood there, drenched, frozen by what he was hearing. It wasn't just talent, it was truth. When the song ended, Althea didn't notice him. She simply bowed her head, ready to walk away like she always did. But this time, someone followed her, not out of pity, but out of belief. In the following days, Ethan searched for her across Davao until he found her again, sitting near the pier, silent as the sea. That day, he offered her something she never expected, a chance. A chance to sing, not for coins, but for a dream. For the first time in her life, Althea felt something awaken inside her. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something stronger, the sense that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. The days that followed were not easy. Ethan had arranged for Althea to join small singing workshops at the community center, but stepping into that bright, echoing room terrified her. The walls felt too clean, too polished, nothing like the streets she knew. The other singers wore confidence like a crown, while she stood there barefoot, clutching her pendant as if it could make her invisible. Her first performance inside those walls was shaky. Her voice trembled, her hands shook, and when she saw the crowd whispering, old fears flooded back. She ran out before the song could end, her tears mixing with the rain once again. But Ethan didn't give up. He found her outside, sitting under a tree, and quietly placed his guitar beside her. No words were needed. He simply strummed the melody of the song she sang that stormy night, the song that had found her when she was lost. Slowly, Althea began to hum again. And that's when she understood something her grandmother once said: faith doesn't grow in comfort, it blooms in struggle. So she kept returning. Day after day. Voice trembling, heart unsure, but stronger than before. She practiced until her throat ached, learned to hold the mic like it was a friend, and started to believe that maybe her pain had meaning. Each note she sang was a conversation with her past, every failure, every night of hunger, every tear for her Lola. It all became part of her sound, a sound too honest to be taught. Slowly, the people who once looked at her with pity began to listen with awe. Even the instructors were moved by the rawness of her soul. She wasn't the loudest or the most trained, but she carried something deeper, truth. Ethan saw it too. He told her one evening, the world needs to hear what you've been through, not what you've practiced. That night, Althea looked up at the stars, whispering softly, Lola, I'm learning. I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time, she wasn't singing to survive, she was singing to live. Months passed, and Althea's life began to change in quiet, miraculous ways. Her name started to spread through the small music circles of Devo, the street girl with the golden voice. One evening, Ethan entered her name into an international audition, Asia's Got Talent, without telling her. When she found out, fear gripped her heart. She was just a girl from the streets. How could she stand before the world? But when she stepped on that grand stage, under the blinding lights and before judges who had heard thousands of voices, Althea remembered the sound of rain on tin roofs, the scent of salt in the Devo air, and her grandmother's trembling hands. This was no longer about fame, it was about honoring every tear, every song, every prayer whispered in the dark. The music began, soft, haunting. Her voice rose slowly, delicate at first, then powerful and unbreakable. The melody carried her story, a child of the streets who had lost everything but never stopped believing. Each note felt like light breaking through clouds, each word a tribute to her Lola Miriam. The crowd fell silent. Even Simon Cowell, known for his sharpness, leaned forward, eyes wide, not in judgment, but in awe. As the final note echoed across the hall, a hush filled the room, followed by the sound of rising applause, first gentle, then thunderous. Tears streamed down Althea's face. She wasn't just singing anymore, she was becoming the dream her grandmother had always seen. When Simon finally spoke, his voice trembled, that was pure soul. Ethan, watching from backstage, closed his eyes, whispering, she did it, Lola. As the golden confetti began to fall, Althea looked up, hands pressed to her heart, and smiled through her tears. She wasn't the poor girl from Devo anymore, she was a testament to faith, pain, and perseverance. And in that shining moment, beneath the lights, it felt as though her grandmother was there too, smiling, proud, and whispering from somewhere beyond. You see, Anak, dreams whispered in the dark do come true. Long after the golden confetti had settled and the applause faded, Althea's story continued to echo far beyond that grand stage. Her performance wasn't remembered only for its beauty, it was remembered for its truth. It reminded the world that greatness doesn't come from wealth or fame, but from the courage to keep believing when no one else does. When Althea returned to Devo, she didn't forget the streets that raised her. She walked the same narrow alleys, this time not with a tin can, but with a purpose. She began singing for children who once stood where she had, barefoot, hungry, invisible. She told them stories of her Lola Miriam, of dreams whispered to the stars, and how even the smallest voice can one day move mountains. The people who once passed her without a glance now looked at her with pride. But for Althea, success was never about the lights or cameras. It was about hearing herself, finally believing that her voice, her pain, and her journey had meaning. Every time she stepped on stage after that, she carried the spirit of her grandmother with her. She would close her eyes, feel the warmth of memory, and sing as if the stars themselves were listening. Her story became a quiet lesson to many, that sometimes, the world's most beautiful miracles rise from its most forgotten corners. That loss can become light, and pain can become power. Life had taken almost everything from her, but it could never take her song. And through that song, she had learned what her grandmother always meant, that dreams aren't meant to be easy, they're meant to be earned, through faith, tears, and love. As the sun set over Davao, Althea stood by the shore, the wind carrying her soft hum into the horizon. Her life was no longer about survival, it was about purpose. Because once upon a time, a poor girl from the streets of Davao proved to the world, and to herself, that dreams whispered in the dark can indeed shine in the light. Sunrise.